Yeah, the H-1B program definitely needs to be reformed because the issue is not whether a relatively modest number of very high-skilled people are able to get into the country. The problem is that the visa as it operates now is letting in lots of people. And the program is explicitly used to replace America. And the New York Times made a big splash. If you're a company and you're willing to pay a $100,000 fee to bring somebody in, clearly you value that person enough. You're not going to pay that for, relative.
There has been quite a bit of outrage. Indian community, I would say, particularly in Silicon Valley, from what I can determine, the United States government introducing a temporary priority scheduling pilot program.
Is preparing to launch a new 12-month pilot program.
Implement a visa bond pilot program.
Do I have all that right?
As far as I know, yes. And the point of it is the renewal issue is that people on H-1B, the H-1B visa was only supposed to be good for 3 years originally. It's a temporary visa, legal. That's what it is. It could be renewed one time for 3 more years. So it became
which Indians are accused of using. They had of many smart immigrants who have come and literally have helped build all of Silicon Valley.
It's true, and the but part is that.
So what to do about this anti-Indian sentiment and, in fact, flat-out racism? What to do about it?
Spray painting something on a Hindu temple is wrong. It shouldn't be allowed, but, we got to do 2 things. Obviously,
about a week ago in Boston, a federal judge put the kibosh on President Trump's $100,000 fee for an H-1B work visa. You might be familiar with this type of a visa. It's necessary for highly skilled workers who are immigrants into the country to work here in the United States. Last year, Trump dramatically ratcheted up this fee to the figure of $100,000, saying that it would protect American workers from losing their jobs. It's understandable, I think, given Trump 2.0 is pushing very hard to bring manufacturing back, as well as get more Americans in employable jobs. But was this move the right thing to do? That's the question. The judge said no and struck down the fee, siding with 20 states, ruling that the Trump administration had exceeded its authority altogether by raising the charge without congressional approval. In fact, U.S. District Court Judge Leo Sorokin ruled, quote, "The court finds that the policy imposes a tax on H-1B petitions without prerequisite delegation by Congress," unquote. Well, as you can imagine, this came as a relief to many workers here in the United States, including those from India. Since the 1990s, America has recruited workers from India on purpose to bring them over to the United States because they are highly skilled in things IT, such as being software engineers, chip designers, creators of cloud systems, and in general, all things, I think, in STEM. Many migrants from India have created, some would say, the entire Silicon Valley system of IT. So they are to be credited. But today is not 1990. Today is 2026, and we're well into Trump 2.0. And this administration is looking seriously at whether the highly skilled visa system, H-1B, requires reform so as to prevent manipulation, or so they say. Indeed, some even say that the Indian migrant assimilated too rapidly to the point of taking over and manipulating the system through loopholes. Is this true? This is what we're going to be talking about on the program today, as well as the relationship between the United States and India in general. Hello there, Terry here on the Terry Gilberg Show with TNT, Terry's News Talkers, my dynamite experts who create dynamite discussions with me. Today's show, I want to mention, is a special edition for Gold Media. And my guest today is someone that you know. I have known him for 20 years, and he is my go-to guy on all things immigration, particularly the vexing issues that surround immigration into the United States. He is Mark Krikorian. He is the director of the Center of Immigration Studies here in DC, in the United States. And I'm very happy to have my friend back. He is the top expert in this issue, so none better than Mark Krikorian to talk about this vexing topic. Hello, Mark. Welcome to the Terry Gilberg Show for Gold Media. Hello.
Glad to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
You're welcome, and it's great to see you again. I want to start with this very interesting topic on visas for highly skilled workers, and specifically whether the program in general, if you think, needs to be reformed. To be sure, Stephen Miller of the Trump administration says we need to have reforms on this. So what is your take?
Yeah, the H-1B program definitely needs to be reformed because the issue is not whether a relatively modest number of very high skilled people are able to get into the country. The problem is that the visa as it operates now is letting in lots of people in addition to those who genuinely are highly skilled, those who really aren't very highly skilled.
Mm-hmm.
And the program is explicitly used and legally used to replace Americans. This has happened over and over and over again. The New York Times made a big splash years ago. They did a front page story on how Disney fired its entire American IT staff, brought in H-1Bs, and then made the Americans train the H-1Bs to explain to them, to teach them how to do their jobs as a condition of getting severance pay. And that was not a one-off, and it's not illegal, even though a lot of senators and congressmen were making outraged press releases and what have you. The H-1B program is explicitly designed to replace American workers. There's no test for whether a company has tried to recruit Americans or anything. And so to get to the $100,000 fee that you led with in your intro, the point of that, first of all, was only an entry fee. So if people who are already here on some other visa, for instance, foreign student visa, or on some other kind of temporary visa, but they're already inside the country, if their employers got them an H-1B visa, they would not pay that fee. That was only if you were coming from scratch, from abroad, with an H-1B visa. So it was a relatively limited number of people it would apply to. But the point of it was to make it more like what the H-1B program is sold as to the public. Because if you're a company and you're willing to pay a $100,000 fee to bring somebody in, clearly you value that person enough. You're not going to pay that for, relatively cheap labor. You're going to pay that for somebody who really is likely to produce value for your company. That was the thinking behind it.
So I understand now. There has been quite a bit of outrage in the Indian community, I would say, is particularly in Silicon Valley, from what I can determine, because now there's this talk, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think it starts July 1st, the United States government introducing a temporary priority scheduling pilot program, because some of these visas are so backed up, green cards are backed up, people are screaming they want to get in through the system, they want to stay here and continue to work. So the US government, from what I can read, Mark, has scheduled this pilot program running through December 31st, starting July 1, for the renewal. So you need to pay an additional $750 plus an application fee of $185 just to secure an interview in a fast track fashion. Do I have all that right?
As far as I know, yes. And the point of it is the renewal issue is that people on H-1B, the H-1B visa was only supposed to be good for 3 years originally. It's a temporary visa, legally, it's what it is. But it could be renewed one time for 3 more years. So it became a 6-year visa. And then Congress changed it so that if your employer has put in an application for you for a green card to convert from a temporary worker to a permanent resident, you can renew now your H-1B visa status every year indefinitely, once a year. And so there are people who have been here 7, 8, 9, 10 years because of the backups, and who need to renew. And so this kind of thing you described is to try to facilitate the renewals. But the problem, it's a Band-Aid. The problem is the program is too large, casts the net too wide, and is unmanageable. And so they have these kind of fixes to try to, kind of put a Band-Aid on the problems that are created by the basic design problems design flaws of the H-1B visa.
All right. So that leads me to this. Stephen Miller, I saw some tape from him, and folks, he's part of the Trump administration, very, very highly regarded official on immigration as well. He is one of Trump's immigration personal advisors on this. He has sharply criticized the H-1B as they are now pointing the finger, particularly at Indian migrants, for, quote, cheating on immigration policy. He's looking at the loopholes in the system, which Indians are accused of using. I don't know about that. Is that true, Mark? What would you say? Because it's really raising the dander, the back of the head, the hair on the back of the head of many, many smart immigrants who have come and literally have helped build all of Silicon Valley.
It's true, and the but part is that every aspect of our immigration system is riddled with fraud, and even if not fraud, then gaming the system. It's just that the reason the Indian issue comes up here is that Indians dominate the flow of H-1B visas. In other words, there's other visas. There's something, not to get into, there's a whole other show, but there's something called the U visa, just to give you an example. And the U visa is for illegal aliens who have become victims of crime, to let them, if they're helping with the investigation and prosecution. It's a complete scam. There are now organized rings of fake crimes. There are people that stage fake crimes in order for the guy working at the gas station to say, oh, I was held up by this criminal. And so give me a record. My point here is that that's exploited by all kinds of different people. Indian illegal aliens, Latin American, you name it. There's every marriage fraud is extremely widespread. My point here is that too much of the discussion, it's become kind of poisonous here, focusing on Indians as Indian, only because Indians already dominate the H-1B flow. Do you see what I mean? In other words, it's kind of a happenstance. There's other visa programs that other ethnic groups exploit and abuse. And it's just that this is the one that gets talked about. And for good reason, it's an important program. But my point is that it spills over, and this is what you were getting at, into kind of anti-Indian rhetoric, sort of bigoted stuff, instead of the real problem, which is the program as Congress has designed it, which needs to be fixed. It's just that Indians make up the hugely disproportionate share of the people using this particular bad visa program.
And so while everyone waits for Congress to fix immigration, which is a long wait, shall we say, Stephen Miller is looking at the loophole. Mark, what is the loophole as it refers to Indian immigrants?
Well, I'm not sure specifically what he's talking about here in particular loophole. There's actually lots of loopholes. I mean, the H-1B visa is supposed to be temporary, but legally it's referred to, and this is something in the law, a dual intent visa, where you can, at the same time, when you get the visa, you can at the same time intend to go home and intend to stay permanently. It's kind of like Schrodinger's cat, you know, that thing where the cat is either here or it's there or whatever. It's Schrodinger's visa. And that is, again, a kind of absurdity built into the immigration law. But, you know, I mean, it's fair to call that a loophole. There are other, H-1B is part of a kind of a pipeline of temporary statuses that end up being a permanent green card, because many people who use this, the kind of standard way it works is that a foreign student will come here and they're on an F-1 visa. That's the name of a foreign student visa. When they graduate, they're not students anymore and they're supposed to leave within 30 days.
Right.
But the government has basically allowed, and this is, you know, this isn't, they're not breaking, I mean, it's illegal, but the people doing it are taking advantage of an illegal act that the government is engaging in. Which is
Thanks for making that point. Say that again so everyone understands that.
Yeah, the H1, it's, I'll explain, let me explain what it is, and then I'll say it's something called optional practical training. OPT is the way it's referred to. And what it is de facto a work visa for 3 years for people, foreign students who graduated in STEM, as a bridge to getting an H-1B, because there's a numerical cap on H-1Bs, except they're not students anymore. So it's illegal for the government to be doing this, to letting them stay on a foreign student visa. Supreme Court challenge failed. There's going to be another challenge, and it will not fail. Not to go into a lot of your listeners don't want to hear too much about it, but Supreme Court ruled that courts don't have to defer to the executive agency's interpretation of law. So what happened earlier in the lawsuit against this OPT program, which, like I said, people are taking advantage of it because it's there, but the government created it and it's illegal. Microsoft's chief lobbyist in Washington cooked it up. And literally at a cocktail party in Georgetown. I mean, it's almost like a parody, like a Tom Wolfe novel, but that's literally how it happened. Anyway, they're no longer students. And the law says when you finish your course of study, you need to leave. But they get to stay on this student visa for 3 years working if they majored in STEM until they can get an H-1B visa. And so then they go to H-1B, they transfer to H-1B. It's supposed to be good for 3 years, renewable for 3 more years. Now it's renewable indefinitely forever. And so a lot of these people have, they're kind of assuming, okay, well, this is just a hoops I have to jump through, but I'm going to stay permanently. So they buy a house and they have kids. And, then what are they supposed to do? You know what I mean? In other words, the system, I actually feel for people who have assumed that they were going to be able to stay.
I do too.
So like I said, they bought a house. Maybe they had kids. Maybe they've had kids here. And then, then it's like, okay, well, now what? The problem here, there is actual fraud on the Indian side. There's no question there's a lot of fraud. And even the Indians don't deny that. Fake diplomas from schools. There was a big story in India about 10,000 fake diplomas from some university, that kind of thing. But the real problem is the structure of the system. The whole way this pipeline of foreign student to OPT to H-1B and then to a permanent green card, that whole thing has been set up by Congress, influenced by employers in order to create a flow of people that employers can control. Because if you are on, let's just say, an H-1B visa, to simplify it, they changed the law. You can change employers, but you have to find an employer who's willing to sponsor you.
That's right. Sponsor that visa.
You're out. And so basically the employer kind of owns you. I mean, it's a form of indentured servitude.
Yes.
And even if you don't want to change jobs, if your employer has a application for a green card in the pipeline for you, you're not going to leave. Because if you leave, even if you get another job, they would have to start the whole green card process from scratch. So this program was designed both to exploit American workers and, replace them, and exploit the foreign workers so that the employers basically own them in a kind of semi-indentured servitude.
So would it be off to think of this in terms of your backstory, your great explanation in terms of bona fide or explaining the $100,000 fee that Trump is trying to get going here anyway in an effort to employ more Americans? I mean, if this is the scenario in the landscape, Mark,
right?
I mean, who would say the $100,000 fee is wrong? Who would say that?
Well, the employers don't want to have to pay it.
Well, sure, but I mean, from a kind of logical point of view, and sort of where the tipping scale is for justice.
Yeah,
fairness.
It does seem pretty obvious, quite frankly, if the visa program, the H-1B program, is what it's sold at, which is top people. Because if you're an employer and there's this guy who's really a top-notch, hotshot, whatever AI guy or works in, I don't know, materials science or something like this, you'll pay $100,000 to bring this guy in. Why wouldn't you?
Right.
But my point is that the lawsuits against it, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, I think, and others have filed lawsuit against it. Obviously, they won initially, although they're not going to win in the end. I don't think there's no way. This is a pretty cut and dry legal thing. But the point is, the employers don't want it, and particularly the employers who use the H-1B program for cheap labor don't want it. Because if you're using the H-1B program for one-off, a couple of people, top-notch people, you'll happily pay that.
Yeah.
But if you're using it for a large-scale importation of kind of average workers, maybe even a little below average, but they're cheaper and more controllable, you don't want to pay that fee because you may not be able to recoup the money. Whereas if you're bringing in some top guy who's going to be creating huge value for your company, sure, you'll pay the fee. Understood. So anyway, there's no question that we need to, this is an effort, a kind of blunt instrument effort, but an effort to raise the quality of the people who come in on H-1Bs.
Well, that begs this question, because I was thinking about this last night. We're all on the verge of, this AI revolution changing work life altogether. So do American tech, robotics, and STEM workers now have a better case? In other words, I'm going to lose my job. President Trump is trying to just get me a job before I lose it. So to heck with all these immigrants, let me just get into the system because I'm going to need a job before AI pulls the rug out from underneath me.
There's no question about it. In fact, we're already seeing some of that, where in last year, it was, or 2024, I think were the most recent numbers, there were more H-1B visas issued than the total number of jobs created in IT. In other words, more people came in from abroad to work in the computer sector than jobs were created in the computer sector. And so this is only going to get worse as AI expands. And so, again, there is a rationale for a program that will select sort of best and brightest people, but that is absolutely not what H-1B is doing. And the reason it's getting so much political attention in the United States, because there's so many other immigration programs that are, just as messed up and bad, is that it's affecting people. Number one, it's affecting the children of the middle class. And those are people who vote, who send campaign contributions, who make their voices heard, and the young people themselves who are affected are way more able to have their voice heard because they're plugged in to chattering class, as it were. Whereas, some people like office cleaners, Black American office cleaners in Los Angeles, were totally wiped out by Latin American immigration. I mean, the wages there, this was something that happened in like the late 70s. All Black American office workers, they were unionized. It was a kind of respectable job for middle-class men to support a family. Totally wiped out, replaced with Central American office cleaners. But those guys don't have the resources to make their voices heard. You see what I mean? People affected by H-1B can have the power to make noise. And so it gets a lot of attention.
Well, speaking of that, they do have the power. And I want to segue our talk here into something you referenced earlier, about 10 minutes ago or so, this anti-Indian sentiment, even racism. Now, this is what they say. I've gone on numerous sites. I've gone on Indian news sites and read Indian articles. They're making their voice heard on H-1B. We've already discussed that. Economic anxieties, scapegoating the Indian as a foreign competitor rather than a model minority. Invasion narratives are out there, displacing American workers. We just talked about that. Vandalism is happening. There was, I think, in the last 3 months, 5 Hindu temples that have been desecrated. Public harassment, go back home mantra, public condemnation, victims of hate crimes, and on it goes. So they're making their voices known. I feel for them. I feel for them because of the illegality in the system. However, Trump and Trump administration is taking the brunt of all of that past. So the Trump administration is again the bad guy. MAGA is again the bad guy. And even Indians that are for MAGA are kind of turning on, I would say, the Trump administration from at least what I can tell, Mark. This is kind of a mess. But we change administrations, unlike other countries. So what to do about this anti-Indian sentiment and, in fact, flat out racism? What to do about it?
Well, I mean, we got to do 2 things. Obviously, that kind of bigotry, and it does exist, it's a real thing.
Yes.
It has to be called out. But remember that a lot of the advocates for the broken H-1B system that we have are using our language of racism, which has to do with Black Americans, as a way of politically defending the H-1B program. You see what I mean? In other words, so what, in my opinion, what we need to do is leaders need to speak out and say, look, this is gross and inappropriate.
And it's just,
conduct by Americans, unworthy
just
of
wrong.
Americans.
It's just
At
wrong.
the same time, we need to fix this program because this is, this is kind of the white collar version of what people maybe won't like this analogy, but it's sort of the white collar version of what we saw with those riots in Belfast. In other words, the political class is not responding to public concerns over the flaws in this program specifically and in immigration in general. And so the reaction ends up often being focusing the anger against the people who took advantage of this program and came here from abroad,
Right.
rather than the people in Congress who created the program in the first place. Now, there's a good people are there are some efforts at constructively focusing that anger at Congress. I mean, that's kind of one of the reasons Senator Cornyn in Texas, lost his primary and will be leaving the Senate at the end of the year.
Yes.
And so that's the kind of sort of constructive focusing of people's anger that works in a democracy. It's the way it should work. Whereas, spray painting something on a Hindu temple is wrong. It shouldn't be allowed. But I mean, I don't condone it in any way. But if the political class is forcing something down the throat of the public, they're going to react somehow. So what we need to do is reform the system and take kind of and so that the kind of normal people who are being swept up in some of this anti-Indian bigotry are pulled away from it. There's always going to be bad guys, but it's becoming a kind of mass phenomenon because of the system Congress has created.
Well, let's go back. In the 1990s, there was George H.W. Bush. Then we had Bill Clinton. Then we had George W. Bush. Then we had Obama. Then we have Trump 1. Then we have Biden. And now we have Trump 2. I would go all the way to Obama, maybe try to skip over Trump 1. And then here comes Biden with open borders and anything goes, freewheeling immigration. It doesn't matter. Which president is more sort of to blame for this? Or administration, I should say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, president's supposed to be in charge of his administration. Biden wasn't, but most of the rest of them were. I'd say all of the above, but obviously Biden was the worst. There's no question about that, or the Biden administration.
Right.
And what they were the worst about, obviously, was at the border. I mean, there are at least 8 million illegal aliens they either affirmatively let into the country or, got by them because the Border Patrol wasn't able to patrol the border. That has nothing to do. I mean, there were some Indian illegals there, actually. That did happen, but it was mainly a, Latin American phenomenon. But that poisons the whole immigration debate.
It sure does.
So that, in other words, so that even discussion of H-1B or whatever else, marriage visas or whatever, all of that stuff is poisoned by the accurate perception under Biden that, there were no rules. Anything goes. You just walk into the border and they'll let you in and give you a sandwich and drop you off at the bus station so you can go and, live with your illegal alien relatives in Chicago or whatever. So restoring order is essential. The Trump administration has restored order at the border, but now we got to restore order to the rest of our immigration system. And quite frankly, H-1B is going to have to be part of that. There are some things the administration can do, like this fee and some other things, but Congress created the system in order, at the behest of employers in the tech industry. It's constructed in such a way to benefit them. And that's not going to, Congress has to change it.
Okay. So between now and, let's say, the midterms, is there a shot that Congress can really change it in the next couple of months? I think it's just a behemoth. And I think it is so muddy and so nutty, I guess, that there's no time. However, I also think that they need to try, because if the Republicans lose in Congress in the midterms, and we don't have a three-way Republican executive House and Senate, a lot of the Trump administration agenda is going to go down in flames. I believe that. Maybe you don't. I do. And Trump needs some more wins on the board, I would say. Maybe the Iran deal is a big win, and then more immigration reform with HIB, maybe, the Ukraine war and other things in geopolitics. But the bottom line is we got a midterm, but soon. And I don't see this H-1B coming together very quickly, although it would make for good television and more good radio and more good podcasting like this if there was more attention paid to it between now and November.
Yeah, I don't see Congress doing anything meaningful at all, really, between now and November. I mean, they have trouble naming post offices. The one of the reasons this is hard to change is that the old paradigm used to be that the Republicans were kind of responsive to big business and corporate interests, and the Democrats were the party of the little man. Well, the Democrats have now become the corporate party.
Yes.
And there are still elements, and if not totally, though, because there are still elements within the Republicans who are basically sock puppets for big employers. And so there's, if the Democrats are all happy with the way the H-1B system works now, because number one, they're the corporate party now, even more than Republicans, and because they're the party that basically supports any form of immigration, no matter what it is, and will resist any effort to rein in anything. And then you have also a portion of Republicans, it's smaller than it used to be, but it's still there, that is also a corporate party. How do you change that? It's difficult to shift that. There is a lot the administration can do. The problem is it's all stuff that can be undone later. For instance, the kind of things like, in addition to this $100,000 fee, we published a piece recently by a woman who was a foreign service officer, herself of Indian origin. I mean, she's an immigrant, foreign service officer for many years. She was doing visa processing in Madras, or Chennai, as they say now.
Yeah.
She said the fraud in the H-1B application process was industrial. It was systemic. There was so much fraud. So there's a lot the administration can do to battle fraud, which will itself make the program less problematic for American workers, and may in fact conceivably shrink the number of people too, and the numbers are too high as well. So the administration can do things on their own. Congress ultimately needs to fix it, because if President Gavin Newsom or whatever comes in, there's no way they're going to keep up anti-fraud measures. I mean, they're for fraud, whether it's in voting or visas or anything else. And so it's the administration's efforts to rein in fraud, both in H-1B and in everything else, are essential, but they're not necessarily going to be lasting. But they have to do them anyway.
Mark, what do you say to the argument that in all of this time that the Indian immigrant has been here since 1990, let's say, there was a point where he or she should have just applied for citizenship. And those that did don't have this problem. And those that didn't, well, kind of do have the problem and continue to have it. Or if you don't want to become a citizen here and take a number and wait in line, and I know that's a lengthy process as well, but go home and get all of your good skills back into your country of India, and start to help employ people there. So I think there is something to be said for, well, in this entire time that you've been here, have you put forth an effort to become a citizen? And when your visa did run out, let's say after 6 years, did you go home with the additional money in your pocket and additional knowledge and experience of working with Silicon Valley to help your own people? What do you say to those arguments?
Well, there's a couple of issues there. One is citizenship specifically is really not an issue for Indian immigrants, especially because the issue is whether they get the green card or not. If you have a green card, which is permanent residence, permanent residence, those people, I mean, I don't know the numbers actually, but I think actually probably Indians with green cards have a relatively high rate of naturalization. Because if you're relatively educated and you have a green card so that your life is here now, they're going to, because the English language test is not hard.
No.
The citizenship test, I've taught the citizenship test It's not hard.
Mhm.
So that's not the issue. The issue is getting the green card to begin with. In other words, converting to permanent resident. And the real issue, the conundrum for a lot of people is that they're in the queue to get a green card. It's just that the line is stretching, out into the future. So again,
Well, sure. But the effort,
but no,
the effort to have the green card in their mind is in many of their minds, because I've talked to them, is synonymous with citizenship. In other words,
I
you're here
understand.
forever.
But it's
And
important to distinguish the two things. You
of
know what I
course,
mean?
of course.
But your point about, wouldn't it be better to, or at least for some people to, take their skills home and strengthen India? The fact is, many of the people who are coming on H-1Bs are just using it as a way to immigrate to the United States, even though they're not really immigrants on an H-1B visa. They think of themselves that way.
Yes.
But they're legally not necessarily any different from me being a tourist in Italy. You know what I mean? In other words, I don't have any right to live there.
Right.
So again, it's the expectations that the program creates and the way it's been structured by Congress, where it's an immigrant visa, but it's not an immigrant visa. In other words, you're coming temporarily, but you're coming permanently. It's like, well, which is it?
It's both.
Yeah, exactly. It's both.
All right, let me move our conversation to something a little bit more upbeat. President Trump is at the G7 this week, and he's working to get good relationships with many countries, including India. And he met with, I think yesterday or the day before, it might have been yesterday, with PM Modi. And they're talking about having a strong relationship, centering around peace and prosperity, not chaos and war, blah blah blah. All of the typical talk about let's make deals, let's have trade and not war and chaos, and I'm the deal maker and all of that. All good. But I also see in the press where and it's Stephen Miller again, saying that India is not really playing nice in the sandbox, Mark, with regard to trade. And therefore, we're not playing nice in the sandbox with regard to them with tariffs. Can you address some of this? Because I thought the relationship was pretty good.
Yeah, well, tariffs are not my issue. So honestly, no. But it is essential. See, the bigger picture is that our having a good working relationship with India is essential in a geopolitical sense, because we have the same big rival, which is China.
Right.
And so there's no
Right.
question this is important, and the Indians make that clear, and this helps them and helps us. Now, we also have a complicated relationship with Pakistan, which is their, real big bogeyman. So, geopolitics is a whole bunch of juggling a whole bunch of balls in the air all at the same time. But the thing is, the immigration angle of this is that the Indian leadership needs to understand that that the H-1B issue is not a trade. It's not part of the trade and tariff discussion, which is the way it's often discussed, not just with India, but everybody. In other words, there's this idea of trade and services. So they basically turn immigration into a trade issue. Immigration is not a trade issue. And the Indian leadership needs to understand that it's one thing to lobby on easy access to the U.S. for, Indian, steel products or something. That kind of thing. Workers is a different thing, because they become part of our society. If we're importing a refrigerator from some country, well, it doesn't work, we throw it away. Who cares? When you're importing a person who buys a house, lives here, send their kids to school, they become part of our society.
No question.
That cannot be part of any trade discussion. And unfortunately, it has in the past, not just with India, but with other countries. And our leadership has encouraged that. There have been, we have tied immigration and trade together in agreements with Chile and Singapore and Australia. And so the Indians are, kind of seeing, well, this is the way Americans dealt with it in the past. So we're going to push an immigration agenda as part of a broader trade discussion. And that's not something that much of this administration is going to go for. And they need to just make clear, look, we want to be friends. We are friends. But the immigration part of it, cannot be part of this trade discussion because it involves who makes up our society rather than the exchange of, trade that's brought here on a container ship.
Right, right. Do you think President Trump is talking to PM Modi mostly about China?
I have no idea. I mean, there's a dozen things they'd be talking about, but in a sense, even when they're not talking about China, they're talking about China. You see what I mean? In other words, China.
And they're also talking about Pakistan. And
Sure,
Pakistan was very instrumental in this deal with Iran.
They're talking about the Iran deal. They're talking about everything, obviously. But in a sense, China's like this big thing that's casting a shadow over everything they discuss. So like I said, even when they're not discussing China, they're discussing China.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Let's talk about the future. Do you expect more Indians to be coming here amid this backdrop of the whole $100,000 now and the diaspora of, and sort of I'm already settled in. Maybe some of my relatives are there, but there's this chaos. We're not sure. Will it be a Trump administration, so-called, going forward with a president in Vance or maybe Marco Rubio? Will the Republicans have maybe a 20-year reign? We change our governments. Other countries don't change their governments so quickly. How do you think the IT, STEM, AI, Indian in India right now might look at the United States, given the landscape that's here on this topic?
I can't get in anybody's head, but there's just no question that the demand to move here, whether from India or anywhere else, the demand to move here is always going to exceed the supply that we want to. In other words, there's always going to be more people who want to move here than we're going to be willing to let in, always. Only if, the U.S. turns into Los Angeles, where we have, drug dealers everywhere, it's a total disaster hellscape. Only then, maybe, would the demand to move here fall off. That's not happening anytime soon. I mean, for the poorest countries in the world, like for Haiti, living on the street, being homeless in the United States is an improvement over living in Haiti for almost everybody.
No question.
But even for India, which obviously is a far more developed country than Haiti, the desire to move here and the kind of the status of getting, say, a degree from a U.S. college, I mean, that's kind of often the way it starts, is still very powerful. And when people, when the reporters will interview somebody saying, well, I don't know if I want to go to the United States anymore because Orange Man bad.
Right.
I don't doubt that. I don't think that's a lie, but there is so much demand for that, to come here, that it's not going to have any effect. The numbers are going to continue until we change our policy. And interestingly, one of the things that would signal a reduction over the longer term is if the number of foreign students admitted shrinks, because India and China are the two biggest sources of foreign students. And coming in as a foreign student is often kind of the first step to eventually finagling a way to stay here indefinitely. So if you see a significant and sustained reduction in foreign students, I don't mean a blip over a year or two, but a significant reduction, then you would see potentially a drop off in the flow of people from India or China or anywhere else. But that isn't happening yet.
Right. And you're saying it's not going to happen in the immediate future. I agree with that. But there is a sense that the bloom is off the rose with regard to certain universities, since you mentioned universities and the hotshot universities. For example, Stanford, has been found out for admitting many graduate students from China who turn around and spy, literally flat out spying. And Stanford's not alone. But I happen to know from firsthand experience at Stanford that they are flat out spying on our robotics departments, our algorithms and AI and all of the IT stuff for the future in tech. And then they take those pictures or their notepads and they go from Palo Alto to the consulate in San Francisco, who has a handler for them. That's the handler. The consulate then calls or sends the spy material that is copied back to Beijing so that student's family is not threatened because the CCP has paid for that tuition. And Stanford, among other universities, they're not alone, has admitted that student. And now that this is found out, and a little bit not a little embarrassment, but a big embarrassment by undergraduates at the student newspaper, Stanford is now taking a special look at this and going, oh, well, maybe we need to, not be doing this anymore. And I say, well, duh. Well, you think? I asked some Stanford alumni, very high in the Alumni Association there. I said, well, what is Stanford's real response to this? We don't see a lot. Oh, well, they're working with the FBI and they don't want to out this too much because the poor student would be harmed. And to the students' point, they want to come here. They want to learn in America. They don't necessarily want to sell out their Stanford for their country, but they don't want their family threatened either. And after all, the CCP has paid for their tuition. So I don't know. Maybe the bloom is off the rose on these hotshot universities anymore. What do you think with stuff like this coming out in the news?
Well, I mean, the problem is that the universities address the kind of thing you're talking about as sort of a one-off problem. We're working with the FBI and there was a bad apple.
It's
That's not the problem. The problem is systemic.
Yes.
We are admitting way too many foreign students. From China, that's a problem because they're spies. Whether they like it or not, they're spies. But we're admitting too many foreign students from everywhere. These universities, even ones that are ostensibly private, are all subsidized by the American taxpayer because either they're state universities where they get direct tax money, or they're private universities that are exempt from taxation. And so they become hedge funds that also give degrees out to young people. I mean, literally, the big schools, Harvard is billions and billions. I mean, they have hedge fund managers like most important people who work at Harvard. Foreign students, in other words, so education at these institutions is a national resource, and we should be reserving that resource mainly for American young people. Absolutely. And admit foreign students as a kind of, what's the analogy from the, actually, this isn't from the Bible, but salt on your food. You want a little bit of salt because it tastes better. If you empty the whole salt shaker onto your food,
it's poison.
Now, yeah, it's bad. And so we need to go back to the idea of foreign students as a little bit of salt that we sprinkle that helps American kids get some more exposure to the world, rather than as part of the business model of these schools where they bring in people. They're essentially selling visas to the United States in the form of tuition. And so anyway, my point is even students who aren't spying or aren't stealing our intellectual property and what have you, when the numbers are so big, it's still a problem.
Yeah. You wouldn't say that, or would you say that there are Indian graduate students that are stealing? Certainly not to the extent that China does, but I'm sure it's there.
It's yeah, probably. I mean, I don't know that it's systemic in the way it is with the Chi-Coms, but I'm sure it happens. But that's, that with regard to people from not China, it really is more of a one-off thing where there's individual examples. But the point is, if you have enormous numbers of foreign students, you're distorting higher education. Yeah. You're distorting the incentives of these universities, and you're expending an important national resource on foreigners instead of American young people.
Right. I know Trump is trying to do something about it. We're down to about maybe 5 or so minutes. Mark, final thoughts on this whole issue? I know we jumped around a little bit, but I thank you. I think we covered a lot of ground. Any final thoughts on the H-1B or the racism sentiment, anti-Indian sentiment, the good things that we have with India and the United States, that we want to preserve that relationship, and the fact that Trump is trying to get nation state to nation state, sovereign state to sovereign state relationships between the United States and any other country that wants to do business with us and be friends with us.
The issue with the sort of the bigotry and anti-Indian feeling really gets back to the issue of assimilation. And by what I mean by that is that when you're bringing in people, foreigners to your country, you need to understand that the economic calculations, the welfare use or not, the national security concerns, all of that, they're all essential. But what you're doing is changing your society. And as Edmund Burke, the British member of parliament, who was sort of the godfather of modern conservatism wrote at one point, and I don't have the exact quote, but what he said is that change is essential in any country. That's just the way it is.
Sure.
But the change should be, and the word he used was insensible, should be slow and not very noticeable. When you're letting in huge numbers of people, concentrated, especially in particular areas, this is what's driving a lot of the problems in Texas, is where whole suburbs have become majority Indian, is that the change is too rapid, and rapid change is unhealthy. It's going to lead to bad results, like defacing Hindu temples, in addition to broader, harmful results.
Yeah.
Numbers are everything. Immigration needs to be low and slow. And if it is, the problems that it can create, both for Americans and the problems that the immigrants themselves would experience, are significantly less. Numbers matter. Numbers are everything. Lower numbers are healthier for the people who do get in and for the society that's already here.
And I think I saw on the Center for Immigration Studies website, I'll close with this, one of the mottos, I guess, if I can say that word, is low immigration, pro-immigrant.
Yeah, exactly. And the other way to put that is fewer immigrants, but a warmer welcome for those that we do take. And that is, that's just, when you put it that way to ordinary people, they're like, well, yeah, of course. You know what I mean? So the problem is that that's not the way policymakers think of it too often.
Yeah. Mark, you're great. Thank you so much. You're a world of information.
Thank you.
I always love talking to you, and I learn things, little bits along the way. We've known each other over 20 years. I was looking back to the first time I ever interviewed you. We've known each other a very long time, and you're always the best. I was telling others that there isn't a question on immigration that I can't give you that you don't have an answer to, and it's the right answer. So thank you very much again. This has been another edition of the Terry Gilberg Show, a very special edition for Gold Media. Happy to be on board. And thank you again to my special guests. Every one of my special guests, TNT, make up Terry's News Talkers, where we provide dynamite discussions for you. Till next time, I'm Terry Gilberg.